What does your environmental platform look like? Because generally speaking, I think the Liberals and I'd say the media have made it so that the only way you can be an environmentalist is by supporting a carbon tax. What's your response to that when you're going to get that question inevitably?
Well, I have a master's of environmental studies, and when I was studying the environment, the term climate change wasn't even in political spheres at that time. It wasn't even popular when I did my master's, the environment. And I did it because I knew that we have to be good stewards of our environment, and I believe that we can develop our natural resources while being good stewards. And net zero is something that I believe is it's capitalizing on fear. And it doesn't, the governmental officials that are using it, they're not even operationalizing it. They're not telling you what it means. It's almost like a boogeyman. And so they can create any policy around it. They will tell you that electric cars are great for the environment and has a low carbon footprint. But when you look at the entire life cycle of an electric car, and you start off in, say, an African country with 5-year-old children working in cobalt or lithium mines, and then you look at the disposal of the battery at the end life, and you calculate all that in the carbon footprint, you would have a very different picture. But they don't do that. But they do it for, say, something like cattle farming. They would calculate the entire life cycle of that cow and that piece of steak on that table. And they would tell you that that is not environmentally efficient for you to eat beef. But they don't do it for other things. And when farmers protest and say, well, why don't I get credit for the sequestration that I'm doing? Why don't I get credit for the fact that I'm doing crop rotation? Why don't I get that credit to reduce my carbon tax that I have to pay to dry my crops? There's no answers. So it's a dictatorial approach. And that approach comes because they conjure up fear about what the environment is. They conjure up fear about climate change being only man-made when we know it's both natural and man-made. And then they use it to create a revenue stream, a taxation stream. And the bad thing about that is that that taxation stream has done nothing to reduce emissions. I care about the environment. I don't want to pay virtue signals with the environment. I want to see real substantive changes that's going to reduce emissions. And I know that farmers have the capacity to do that because their livelihoods depend on it. But the government is just not communicating. They are just expecting people to toe the line and not ask questions, and I don't think that that's a productive way to move forward.
But emission reduction is the backbone of net zero. Now, obviously, net zero is wanting to reduce emissions to zero, at least ostensibly, and I know that there's a lot of debate about whether the idea of offsetting really exists, but it's formulated on the idea of reducing emissions. So how does your plan, which you're saying involves wanting to reduce emissions, differ from the Liberal government's plan, with the exception of the carbon tax? What are you going to do? Unless your answer could just be, we'll let farmers and let the market do it, which is perfectly fine. But do you want government to have a role in this emission reduction?
I do believe that there are market incentives that can be provided, and that is for things such as innovative technologies that will actually enhance conservation, reduce emissions. And many farmers implemented those technologies in order to save their farms. And then the government came back and said, no, that's not enough. You need to reduce nitrogen by X amount. And that's the problem that we're seeing now in the Netherlands, that the target keeps shifting. The goal keeps shifting. What we need is some continuity. We need to have metrics that we can measure, that people can question. And it doesn't have to be a one-sided dictatorial approach.